What up everyone, SHAK here, and today I'm going to run you through the history of the UFC middleweight division from January 2020 all the way to present. This is a continuation of the great work Mike Hutchinson did at Bloody Elbow Presents. That goes from about 2013 to 2018, so we're going to pick up at 2020 and see how we got here. Let's take a look at the starting bracket, January 20th, 2020. Israel Adesanya is your world champion. He won that title by knocking out Robert Whittaker in 2019. Number 1 is Whittaker, then Costa, Yoel, Jared, Darren, Jack, Kelvin, Derek, Edmund, and Uriah Hall rounding out the top 10. Now, our first movement in the rankings comes on March 7th when Adesanya makes his first defense against Yoel Romero at UFC 248. The fight is remembered for being terribly boring, with neither man, particularly Yoel, willing to engage. They threw only 88 combined strikes across 5 rounds. Adesanya won a relatively close unanimous decision. As a consequence, Romero and Cannonier swap number 3 and number 4 respectively. Then on May 19th, Darren Till, who hasn't fought since beating Kelvin Gastelum in November 2019, randomly got a bump in the rankings to share the number 4 spot with Romero. Full disclosure, I am a panelist on the Bellator rankings, not UFC, so my best guess is that one or some of the members on the panel reviewed their middleweight rankings, made amendments, or someone noticed maybe that they hadn't updated it in the last couple weeks. Maybe they missed a fighter and they went back to sort of amend that. And so much for Darren Till. Come June 22nd, I guess someone had second thoughts. Back down to number 5 you go. There we go, our first big movement of the year. Jack Hermansson moves up 2 spots from number 6 to number 4. It's odd because he did not compete on the August 1st card preceding this, but he was coming off a 1 minute 18-second heel hook submission win over Kelvin Gastelum on July 19th. Hermansson had lost via KO to Cannonier in his prior fight, so it makes sense that he'd still be behind the Killer Gorilla. Hermansson's rise forces Romero and Till down 1 spot each. Brunson TKO'd Ronda Rousey protege Edmund Shabazian in round 3, bumping Brunson up from 8 to 7. Shabazian drops from 9 to 10 as a consequence. Brunson pushed Gastelum 7 to 8. Meanwhile, Edmund's drop to 10 means that Hall moves up to 9. Let's give the rankings a little reset after so much movement, and we move on to September 10th. Former UFC middleweight champion Chris Weidman finds himself back in the top 10 after a random shuffle, knocking Edmund out of the top 10. Weidman did beat Omari Akhmedov via unanimous decision 1 month prior, so that probably played a role. Another random shuffle sees Weidman creep up at the expense of Hall as they swap positions in the rankings, and spoiler alert, you're going to see a lot of this. It seems the panelists remembered that wine-drunk Paulo Costa got squashed by Israel Adesanya at UFC 253 on September 27th. So, Jared Cannonier moves up 1 spot as a consequence as Costa gets nudged down. And never mind, Cannonier loses a unanimous decision to former middleweight champ Robert Whittaker and reverses spots with Costa. Whittaker at this stage was tasked with turning back other contenders, including Darren Till, as he attempted to earn a rematch against Adesanya. Now we move on to November 2nd. This is going to be a reoccurring thing through the video. Hall and Weidman again swap positions after Hall defeated the legendary Anderson Silva via round 4 TKO on Halloween Eve. This was Silva's last fight in the UFC before he went on to win boxing matches against Tito Ortiz and Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. before losing to Jake Paul. Marvin Vettori makes his top 10 debut on December 7th and immediately snags the number 5 spot after defeating Jack Hermansson in the main event of a UFC Fight Night card. Vettori was previously ranked number 13. He scored 3 49-46s against Jack Hermansson. The loss pushed the Joker down 2 spots to number 6 and gave Till a gentle nudge from 5 to 4. Let's clean the slate as we approach the end of 2020. And on December 14th, welcome to the top 10, Kevin Holland, and goodbye Weidman. Holland was on fire in 2020. He tied the UFC record for most wins in a calendar year at UFC 256. Holland was on his back with jiu-jitsu monster Jacare Souza on top of him, and it looked like Holland was 1 mistake away from peril, but he landed some crazy hammer fists from the bottom that knocked out the longtime middleweight contender. The win bumped Holland from number 15 to number 10, and the reason Jacare wasn't in the rankings at this time was because he had moved up to light heavyweight in a loss to Jan Blachowicz. Jacare only fought once more in the UFC, losing to Andre Muniz before retiring. Let's look over the UFC Middleweight top 10 to start 2021. Izzy is still your world champion. Robert Whittaker, Paulo Costa, Cannonier, and Darren Till take the 1 through 4 spots respectively. Marvin Vettori, our first debutant, who wasn't on the list last year, is now at number 5. Jacare at 6, Derek Brunson at 7, Kelvin Gastelum at 8, Uriah Hall at 9, up 1 spot from last year, and making his debut in 2021, Kevin Holland, who was not there at the start of January 2020. Now, on February 8th, a random shuffle bumps Uriah Hall to number 8 and drops Kelvin Gastelum to number 9. Man, these rankings are almost as indecisive as my wife ordering off a menu. Gastelum snatches back his number 8 spot from Hall 1 week later after winning a unanimous decision against Ian Heinisch at UFC 258. 1 month later, and we're seeing a lot of movement. Derek Brunson defeats Kevin Holland via unanimous decision in the main event of UFC Fight Night at the Apex. Brunson curries a lot of favor with panelists, bumping him from number 7 all the way to number 4. Till, Vettori, and Hermanson were all shoved 1 spot down as a consequence of Derek's return to the top 5. We do a little reset and we move on to April 12th. Holland set another unique record when he turned around in 3 weeks for a second consecutive UFC main event, tying the previous record. The UFC Fight Night was originally supposed to be headlined by Vettori and Darren Till, but Till fell out. Vettori copy and pasted Brunson's game plan and landed 11 takedowns on Holland en route to 3 50-44 scorecards. Bad call by Holland from a developmental standpoint, but at least my man got paid. Vettori jumps from 9 to 6 after outdoing Brunson's performance. Cannonier, Brunson, and Till all moved down 1 spot to accommodate Vettori's rise. A second straight loss also nudges Holland out of the top 10, leaving room for Edmund Shabazian to return. Another reset to cleanse the palate, and we move on to April 19th. Uriah Hall and Kelvin Gastelum continue to swing like your parents on the weekend. Gastelum drops 1 spot after losing a unanimous decision to Robert Whittaker. This was Whittaker's 3rd straight win and secured him his well-earned rematch against Adesanya. On May 24, 2021, Edmund Shabazian faces another high-level grappler 1 year after getting dominated by Derek Brunson. Jacare beats the up-and-comer via round 3 TKO and swaps positions with Till in the middleweight rankings. Marvin Vettori drops 1 spot 9 days after losing a lopsided decision to UFC middleweight champion Israel Adesanya. As a consequence, Cannonier moves up 1 spot to number 3. Introducing the other half of UFC 293's main event to the UFC Middleweight Top 10, soon-to-be title challenger Sean Strickland debuts at number 8 on August 9th after defeating Uriah Hall in a 5-round Fight Night main event. It wasn't a super memorable fight, but Strickland won handedly on the scorecards, reading 50-44, 50-45, 49-46. Hall drops 2 spots to number 10, and Edmund gets bumped from the top 10. My birthday week was a busy one in the middleweight division. 3 sets of fighters swapped spots in the rankings. Derek Brunson and Marvin Vettori did a 1-for-1. Same goes for Sean and Darren Till, and Uriah Hall and Kelvin Gastelum. Basically what happened here is that Brunson defeated Till via round 3 submission, elevating Brunson and dropping Till. That bumped Vettori down and bumped up Strickland. Gastelum dropped 1 spot after losing a unanimous decision to Cannonier. Another clean slate, and we move on to October 4th. I guess the panelists decided they were too harsh dropping Gastelum for losing to number 3 ranked fighter in the division, so he swaps with Hall once again. Marvin Vettori and Paulo Costa headline a fight night remembered most for Costa's incredible weight miss. I mean, homie missed weight so badly that the fight was contended up a division at light heavyweight. I mean, Paulo didn't even try to make weight. He just strolled into fight week like, sorry bro, it ain't happening. Don't be a pansy, take the fight. You know, the fight was originally moved from 185 to 195 and ultimately 205. That didn't stop Vettori from winning a 48-46 decision. Vettori won 3 rounds to Costa's 2, but Costa hilariously was deducted a point for an eye poke in round 2. It wasn't technically a middleweight fight, but that didn't stop Vettori from jumping from number 5 to 2 and Costa dropping 2 to 5. Hall and Gastelum are swapping like spit. I'm not even going to try and make sense of it anymore. All right, let's review the UFC Middleweight Top 10 to start 2022. Izzy is still your champion. Robert Whittaker at 1, Vettori all the way up to 2, Cannonier 3, Brunson 4, Costa 5, Jacare 6, Sean Strickland, the new addition this year at number 7, Till at 8, Hall at 9, and Kelvin Gastelum at 10. Strickland defeats Hermansson in a rather unusual split decision at UFC Fight Night. 2 judges awarded Strickland the fight, 49-46, but 1 judge favored Hermansson 47-48. This wasn't a super memorable fight. They swapped spots in the rankings. Cannonier knocked out Brunson with a filthy elbow at UFC 271 to reclaim the number 2 spot and push Vettori down to 3. This was on the main card of Adesanya vs Whittaker 2. Whittaker showed a vastly improved game plan, lost by a close margin on the scorecards, 248-47s, 149-46. He told me afterwards that even though he didn't win his title, he won back something more important, quote, his soul. Also, Strickland continues to curry favor with the panelists and gets a slight boost from number 6 to number 5, tying with Costa. A random shuffle has Brunson, Costa, and Strickland in a 3-way tie for number 4. My best guess is 1 or more panelists lowered Brunson's rankings after his loss to Cannonier, but the overall ranking scores tied him up with Costa and Strickland. A random shuffle drops Costa to number 6, while Brunson and Strickland continue to share number 4 like 2 well-endowed gentlemen share your mother. Moving on. Another small shuffle separates Strickland and Brunson, with Strickland retaining his number 4 spot and Brunson dropping down to number 5. Welcome to International Fight Week 2022. Fun fact, I was there for Morning Combat's live show, and I can confirm those margaritas hit Luke Thomas harder than Alex Pereira hit Sean Strickland. Speaking of Poatan, he leaps from the void of the unranked all the way to number 6 after knocking out Strickland in round 1 of their UFC 276 fight. Strickland drops from 4 to 7, and due to his slide, Brunson moves up 5 to 4, Costa moves 6 to 5. Strickland dropping to 7 pushed Hermansson and Till down to number 8 and number 9 respectively. There were also 2 other fights that impacted the middleweight rankings that night. Israel Adesanya defended the middleweight title against Cannonier, beating him 49-46 on 2 scorecards, 50-45 on the other. The most interesting thing about the fight was probably Adesanya's Undertaker-inspired walkout. Cannonier did not lose his number 2 ranking, but he was dinged enough by the rankings panel that Vettori wound up tying him at number 2. On the early prelims, Andre Muniz swept Uriah Hall 30-27 on the scorecards. Muniz debuts at number 10, knocking Hall down to 12. The introduction of 2 new fighters in the top 10 also pushed Kelvin Gastelum, previously at number 10, down to 11. Let's reset the plate after a busy night, and we move on. I guess someone remembered that Vettori lost to Adesanya worse than Cannonier did, and the Italian Dream is back at number 3. Another random shuffle bumps Pereira to share number 5 with Paulo Costa. And Alex Pereira continues to creep up, and then right by him, securing number 5 solo, while Paulo Costa drops to 6. The rankings continue to flop like every podcast I've ever tried to start. Vettori creeps back to the number 2 spot with Cannonier. On this weekend, Paulo Costa won that crazy fun slop fest with a returning Luke Rockhold. Unfortunately, beating an unranked and previously retired middleweight champion was not enough to spur movement for Costa in the rankings. Well, that did not last long for Vettori. After losing a competitive decision to Adesanya in their rematch, Robert Whittaker gets back to beating everyone not named Stylebender. Bobby Knuckles outclasses Vettori to a unanimous decision at UFC's first ever French card in Paris. France had long banned MMA, so this was a pretty significant fight night. Anyways, Vettori drops to number 3 after losing to Whittaker. Brunson finds himself in the crossfire of Pereira's hype, dropping 1 spot for no apparent reason as Pereira continued to climb the ranks without fighting since the Sean Strickland win. Okay, November 14th. Wow, 1 month passes, and for the first time since we started this video, Israel Adesanya's name is no longer on top. 4 UFC fights, 8 MMA fights is all it took for Pereira to become a UFC champion. Adesanya's recurring nightmare continued at UFC 281 on November 12th. The boogeyman Pereira sent Adesanya out of kickboxing with a loss, had beaten him twice in that sport, and was the only person to ever knock out Izzy. Fast forward to UFC 281, Pereira went 3-0 in their combat sports series and became the only person to hand Izzy a loss in both sports. Adesanya nearly stopped Pereira in round 1 and looked like he was en route to winning a decision, but Pereira's leg kicks took their toll by round 5, neutralized Adesanya against the fence, and uncorked huge punches for the 5th round stoppage. Pereira becomes middleweight champion. Adesanya drops number 1. Whittaker, Cannonier, and Vettori all drop 1 spot as a consequence. let's wipe the slate clean as we approach the end of the year. And welcome to the top 10. Roman Dolidze, the Georgian fighter, knocked out Jack Hermansson in 2 rounds at UFC Fight Night Thompson vs. Holland in Florida to make his top 10 debut. Hermansson and Darren Till each dropped 1 spot accordingly and pushed Andre Muniz out of the top 10. Let's do a little reset. And to cap off the year, another new addition to the UFC Middleweight top 10, and it's the man who was supposed to fight Adesanya at UFC 293. South Africa's Dricus du Plessis snatches a face crank on Darren Till in a wild scrap that earned both men Fight of the Night honors. It was a performance that reinforced Dricus as an offensive threat, but had people questioning his cardio. Du Plessis snatches number 10 from Till and sends Darren off the page. 3 years into this project, and here's where the rankings stand. Alex Pereira is your new middleweight champion. Israel Adesanya down to number 1. Whittaker at 2, Cannonier at 3, Vettori at 4, Brunson at 5, Paulo Costa 6, Sean Strickland 7. New to this year's list, Roman Dolidze at number 8, Jack Hermansson number 9, and another new addition for the year, Dricus du Plessis. Okay, so unfortunately, here is where we hit a bit of a snag. MMA Stats only has rankings data collected up to February 14th, 2023. At that time, the rankings were the same as at the start of the year, so I'm going to show you how the rankings evolved from February 14th all the way to the week of UFC 293 and highlight the big changes. Obviously, Israel Adesanya is the champion heading into 293. He avenged that loss to Alex Pereira via early KO, had that amazing post-fight speech, and Alex Pereira since jumped to light heavyweight, meaning he is no longer in the middleweight rankings. Number 1 contender Dricus du Plessis finished Derek Brunson via corner stoppage at 4:59 of round 2 of their meeting at UFC 285. Dricus' statements about becoming the real African champion was ground zero for a messy feud with Israel Adesanya that we won't expand on in this video. Dricus was subsequently booked opposite Whittaker at International Fight Week 2023. UFC President Dana White announced the winner would challenge Adesanya at UFC 293 in Sydney. Whittaker was the betting favorite due to his elite experience, well-rounded skills, and high work rate, but Dricus washed over Whittaker with a round 2 TKO in his biggest win to date. Du Plessis is currently 20-2 as a pro, a perfect 6-0 in the UFC, but he was dealing with an injury and unable to make the short 2-month turnaround for 293. Jared Cannonier is still at number 3 after consecutive decision wins over Sean Strickland and Marvin Vettori. Vettori bounced back by decisioning Roman Dolidze but lost to Cannonier, so he stays put at number 4. Sean Strickland jumped from number 7 to 5 thanks to his workhorse mentality. The man fought 4 times in 364 days. The KO loss to Pereira and the contentious split decision loss to Cannonier were followed by consecutive wins over Nasruddin Imavov and Abbas Magomedov. Strickland's willingness to step on short notice against lower-ranked contenders, Dricus' injury, and Adesanya's success against the contenders in front of him opened the door for Strickland to get a title shot on just 1 month's notice. Paulo Costa has not fought since beating Luke Rockhold, but announced fights between him and both Robert Whittaker and Ikram Aliskerov fell through. Costa instead is set to welcome ranked welterweight Khamzat Chimaev back to middleweight at UFC 294. He remains at number 6. Derek Brunson's decisive loss to Dricus du Plessis dropped him from number 5 to the shared number 7 spot with Dolidze. The co-ranking holders will fight for number 7 harder than my parents did for me in divorce court. Just kidding, I love you mom and dad. At UFC 295, Jones versus Miocic. Jack Hermansson is still at number 9 after the Dolidze loss in December, and new to the UFC middleweight top 10 is Brendan Allen. Allen is on a fantastic 4-fight winning streak with 3 consecutive rear naked choke wins, including one over former top 10 middleweight Andre Muniz. A new report says that Brendan Allen and Paul Craig, who recently dropped from light heavyweight and is currently ranked number 13 at middleweight, will headline a UFC Fight Night on November 18th, and there we have it.